The word niche and the word habitat are not just textbook concepts in my mind. They're ideas that I use to understand nature more deeply. The concept of niche and habitat helped me share nature with others when I used to work as a tour guide. Niche and habitat are a part of my naturalist toolkit. As ideas, niche and habitat can be a bit confusing. They're overlapping concepts, and it's easy to kind of get confused and not really understand clearly what they mean. I don't find definitions sufficient to understand the concepts properly. I think it's better to explore the ideas a little bit, and so that's what we're going to do in this video. These ideas can be somewhat messy, and my plan is to start off digging into that messiness and just taking a look at how complicated it really is. Then we'll see if we can dig into that complexity and simplify things and come up with a concept that is useful for observing nature. To explore this messiness, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite animals, the leopard. Panthera pardus, the leopard, is found in various places, into Indonesia, in Asia, and then throughout a lot of Africa. The leopard that I'm speaking about specifically is the African leopard, and the only reason I'm doing that is because that's the one I know. Amongst the big predators, leopards are a bit small. They're certainly smaller than lions and tigers. A very big leopard weighs about the same as an adult human. Leopards hunt a variety of prey sizes, from fairly big antelope right down to pretty small mammals, birds and reptiles. Leopards are very solitary and have territories. Amongst their characteristics, the thing that stands out the most in terms of our discussion is the fact that leopards are very widely distributed. They're found in a variety of habitats. To state this more clearly, leopards are found in the Namib Desert, in a dry, proper, hyper-arid desert. And yet, leopards are also found in the Central African rainforests, in the Congolese forests. Within continental Africa, that's about as extreme as you can get. So let's ask the question, what is the niche and what is the habitat of a leopard? Let's start with habitat. What do we think of when we think of habitat? We kind of think of the characteristic of the place in which a specific organism exists. So in the case of the leopard, what's the place that we find leopards in? For any particular organism, we can think of that as being a place made up of certain ecosystems. In terms of natural ecosystems on Earth, we can define them in all sorts of ways. You can think of biomes like a forest or the tundra or savannas. These are large-scale ecosystems in a way. And we can break it right down to where we're talking about tiny ecosystems, the back end of a leaf, or even way tinier if we're talking about microscopic ecosystems. But we do run into a problem if we use ecosystems as our definition for a habitat. Ecosystems are not defined by one animal or one organism. Ecosystems are made up of a host of organisms, and they're defined rather arbitrarily. We just look at a place that has certain characteristics, and we decide that that seems to match up as a kind of ecosystem. But it doesn't necessarily have to do with any one animal. Let's illustrate this. Let's imagine we have a type of woodland, and that type of woodland has one specific tree that has a specific fruit. And imagine that there's an insect, which depends entirely on that fruit. We could say that the ecosystem, the habitat of that insect is that type of woodland. But we can also realize that that particular tree with that fruit isn't distributed evenly throughout that ecosystem. It might be abundant enough in certain sectors and missing entirely in other sectors, and yet we would still define that ecosystem. So it doesn't define the space that is occupied by that one animal. So to define the habitat of a leopard, we can only define that habitat as the habitat of the leopard. And to get a better understanding of that, let's discuss niche first. Let's take a stab at describing what could be a leopard's niche. A leopard is a stealthy hunter. It needs good hiding places, and it needs prey of the correct size. And so we could say that that's its niche. A leopard needs to be able to hunt in the way that suits its characteristics best. And defining it like that is not far from the correct definition, in a way. But what did we use as the determining characteristics? How do we know what things are included in niche and what things aren't? We've just picked some properties that match up well with what we know about leopards, but it's incomplete. We haven't considered every possible thing that there could be. So let's do that. If you like maths, you can think of a set. If you don't like maths, imagine a big box in which we're going to throw all the ideas, all the things that work for the leopard's niche. We could start by thinking about everything that can possibly work for the leopard, all the things that seem to be characteristics that apply. But that's a bit vague, and so we need to look at it from an evolutionary point of view. A leopard is an organism that has survived to the present day and has been changed by evolution over the span of time. To define a niche in this way, we end up having an infinite number of levers. We can think of any single thing that would kill a leopard as being excluded from its niche. Would a leopard survive under the water in the sea? No. So that's excluded from its niche. There are millions of characteristics like this, situations, phenomena that would not suit a leopard. For many of these things, we can rather think of it as a probabilistic thing. In other words, if some condition is present too often, leopards don't do well. They don't survive. So that takes our infinite possibilities even further out. Evolution is not just about the survival of the individual. In evolutionary terms, an animal must survive long enough to have viable offspring. So we can expand this set of characteristics even further to any single thing that would mean that the leopard cannot breed. There are just a very wide variety of things that did not happen or were just right in whatever way in order for today's leopards to have the ancestry that they do. Let's now think about how we can take these infinite factors and trim them down to be useful. Of this nearly infinite variety of factors that influence a leopard's reproductive success, there's some limited set of these characteristics that actually play a far bigger role. Another way to put this is, there are many, many things that could result in a leopard not being able to breed, but in the long stretch of history, only a certain number of those things actually had an impact. Turning the idea around, we can imagine that there's some set of characteristics that actually do limit where and how leopards live. Let's take an example. Temperature. There might be some temperature that's too hot, and there's some temperature that's too cold for a leopard. But it could be, particularly in the central parts of Africa, that the leopard never even comes near to those extremes within its particular environment, within the area that it's living in. And so those factors can be excluded as being important in that area. It doesn't limit where the leopard lives. It doesn't limit the leopard's ability to breed. We can think of this as the idea of ecosystem pressure. For any particular animal or organism of any kind living in an environment, there are going to be some set of pressures, some set of factors which are nearer to the limits for that particular organism. So of all the possible factors, it's those ones that are the actual pressure, the ones that do affect it, which are the important ones in any particular environment. But in terms of exploring nature and being a naturalist, really it comes down to this one simple question. What makes the leopard fit in the environment in which it lives? It's a simple question, but it makes nature really interesting. Let's imagine you're on safari with me in Africa, and we're really fortunate to find a leopard. Just finding them is super special. Leopards are hard to find. If you spend a lot of time in nature, you tend to see lions and elephants and all these other things. When you do find a leopard, you can enjoy just seeing it. They're beautiful animals. But there's always the question, what is this animal doing here? How does it work? How does it live in this environment? So what makes a leopard be able to live in the Namib Desert, in the savannas, and in a forest? And conversely, what are the pressures that it faces within this environment? It becomes a question of the adaptations that the leopard has. Adaptations mean what characteristics of its body and what characteristics of its behavior help it to fit within this environment that it experiences. Leopards hunt by being sneaky. They are very good at hiding. It's one of the reasons why leopards are so seldom seen. They are extremely quiet and good at sneaking. They live alone and they have a very broad prey base. And so they're ideally suited to any environment that has suitable prey and allows them to have places to hide and sneak. As far as limits, a very obvious one is the fact that Africa has a pretty incredible set of large predators. There are lions and hyenas that are both a challenge for leopards. So leopards not only need their hiding places to hunt, they also need them to avoid being killed by more powerful predators. Because of the leopard's need for shelter, there are certain places within the environments in which they live that they don't utilize. They very seldom move into open spaces. If they do so at night, and they would only do so in the absence of large predators. I've observed this myself within the Namib Desert. In areas where spotted hyenas were found, leopards were pretty much restricted to mountainous areas. But in other areas where hyenas weren't found, leopards were moving far more out into the open. Those characteristics that we've just discussed are the obvious ones. They're the things that most people would know about a leopard. There are, however, possibly a bunch of factors that are not as obvious. For example, how well do leopards resist disease? There can be a host of different things that influence how a leopard can survive in a specific habitat. When you're observing an animal in the wild, it's really useful to have some of this background knowledge as to what are the characteristics typical of that animal, and to observe its actions and adaptation to its environment, and see how those particular characteristics play out. The great thing about this kind of thinking is you can apply it to any animal, any creature, or any organism. Plants, fungus, absolutely everything in nature has some set of things that's causing it pressure, some set of things to which it has adaptations. And this kind of thinking just makes nature that much more thrilling and interesting. Niche to me means those set of factors that are most pressing in how an animal survives and that illustrate the adaptations that it has to have in order to counterbalance those pressures. And habitat just relates to what it's adapted to. There's a certain space in the environment to which that animal has adaptations where it fits. If you've made it this far through the video, thanks so much for watching.